Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Attention. There is a moment that forever alters how we perceive our own presence in the world, and it usually arrives not with a loud revelation, but with a quiet, devastating realization of absence. Imagine sitting across from the person you love most, perhaps your own child. You have intentionally carved out this time. You have an activity book spread open between you, filled with suggestions for building bonds and creating memories. The instruction is simple. Fold a paper airplane together. The intention is pure. Yet, as the little hands begin to fold the paper, a subtle vibration emanates from your pocket. A screen lights up. Without conscious thought, your eyes dart downward. The physical body remains in the room, but the mind is instantly transported elsewhere, hijacked by a digital notification, an email, a sudden, meaningless urge to check the endless feed of the outside world. When you finally sever the digital tether and look back up, the chair across from you is empty. The child has left the room. The moment is gone, irretrievable. This profound failure of presence is not merely an anecdote about a wandering mind, it is the defining crisis of our modern era. We live in a society where our attention is continuously fractured, sold, and manipulated. It is easy to point the finger of blame at the glowing rectangles we carry in our pockets. We demonize the technology, the applications, and the brilliant engineers who design them. There is a deep irony here for anyone who has spent their career understanding how these digital products are built. The very mechanics used to build habit-forming technologies, the triggers, the investments, the variable rewards, are incredibly effective. They are designed to hook us. But recognizing that the system is engineered to capture our attention is only half the battle. The far more uncomfortable truth is that technology is not the root cause of our wandering minds. It is merely the most convenient pacifier for a much deeper underlying condition. To truly understand how to reclaim our lives, we must deconstruct the very anatomy of our behavior. Every single action we take throughout our day falls into one of two categories. The first is traction. The word itself comes from the Latin root trahere, which means to draw or to pull. Traction consists of any action that pulls us toward what we genuinely want to do. It is the deliberate alignment of our time and our values. When we sit down to write, and we actually write, that is traction. When we dedicate an hour to our family and remain entirely present, that is traction. It is the physical manifestation of our stated intentions. The opposite of traction is distraction. Notice the shared root. Both words end in action. They are not passive states. They are behaviors we enact. If traction draws us toward our goals, distraction is the pulling away of the mind. It is any action that moves us further from what we intended to do. The tragedy of distraction is not just the time lost to trivialities. It is the insidious way it tricks us. Spending 45 minutes organizing an email inbox might feel productive, but if the original intention was to finish a critical business proposal, that inbox organization is nothing more than a highly sophisticated form of distraction. It is a rationalized escape from the work that actually matters. These actions, both traction and distraction, do not occur spontaneously. They are prompted by triggers. The most obvious culprits are external triggers. These are the cues in our environment that tell us what to do next. They are the pings, the dings, the ringing phones, the push notifications, and even the well-meaning colleague who taps us on the shoulder to ask a quick question. External triggers are everywhere, aggressively competing for our cognitive bandwidth. However, the far more powerful and far less understood forces dictating our behavior are internal triggers. These are the cues that originate from within us. They are negative emotional states that we instinctively seek to escape. We reach for our phones not because we consciously want to see a new post, but because we are feeling a momentary pang of boredom. We open our email in the middle of a complex task because the task has become difficult and the brain craves the easy dopamine hit of clearing a simple message. We check the news because we feel anxious, or we scroll through social media because we feel lonely. The device is merely a conduit. The true source of the distraction is the human desire to alleviate psychological discomfort. Understanding this dynamic completely shifts the battleground. If distraction is fundamentally a desire to escape negative emotions, then time management is, at its core, pain management. We cannot simply lock away our devices and expect to become focused. If we do not address the internal emotional triggers that drive us to seek escape, our minds will simply invent new ways to distract us. We will find ourselves staring out a window, organizing a perfectly clean desk, or ruminating on past conversations. In a world where the sheer volume of external triggers will only increase, and where the technologies vying for our attention will only become more sophisticated, the ability to control one's focus is no longer just a helpful productivity hack. It is the skill of the century. It is the defining superpower of the future. The world is rapidly dividing into two groups: those who allow their attention and their lives to be engineered and extracted by others, and those who proudly claim the title of being indistractable. Becoming indistractable does not mean swearing off technology, living like a monk, or never experiencing a wandering thought. It means developing a profound understanding of your own psychological mechanics and implementing a systematic defense against the forces that seek to pull you away from your purpose. It requires a fundamental shift in how we approach our days. We must learn to master the internal triggers that drive us to escape. We must proactively make time for traction, transforming abstract values into concrete schedules. We must ruthlessly hack back the external triggers that constantly interrupt our flow. And finally, we must prevent distraction before it happens by creating pre-commitments that lock us into our desired behaviors. This is not merely about getting more work done, it is about choosing the life you want to live and having the fortitude to actually live it. Chapter 2. Mastering Internal Triggers. Imagine a device designed so brilliantly, utilizing every psychological trick in the modern playbook, that it slowly begins to ruin your life. This was the stark, uncomfortable reality for a professor at the Yale School of Management. She was a recognized expert who taught future executives the secrets of mastering influence and consumer behavior. Yet she found herself utterly powerless against a piece of technology. The device that ensnared her was not a slot machine or a violent video game. It was a pedometer. It was a smart fitness tracker designed by former video game developers, complete with tournament-style leaderboards, points, and a virtual world that users could build by walking. The professor became a fitness zombie. She paced endlessly around her house, from the living room to the kitchen and back again, just to accumulate points. One night, a midnight pop-up challenge offered her triple points to climb a few flights of stairs. 2 hours later, at 2 a.m, she finally stopped, having climbed over 2,000 stairs in her basement, a distance greater than the height of the Empire State Building. We listen to a story like this and immediately blame the technology. We point to the flashing screens and the point systems, but doing so misses the fundamental truth of human motivation. For centuries, we have operated under the assumption popularized by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham, that mankind is governed by two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. We believe we are drawn to pleasure and repelled by pain. However, this dualistic view is neurologically inaccurate. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus understood our operating system far better when he observed that what we call pleasure is simply the absence of pain in the body and trouble in the soul. At a neurological level, all motivation is driven by a single desire: to escape discomfort. Even when we believe we are pursuing a pleasurable reward, what actually compels us to act is the uncomfortable ache of wanting, the craving, the desire, the anticipation. These are biologically painful states that our brains seek to alleviate. If we accept this truth, we must reconsider how we view our modern distractions. When we blame our phones, our social media feeds, or our fitness trackers, we are merely identifying the proximate causes of our behavior. A proximate cause is the cue ball striking the 8 ball in a game of pool. It is the immediate catalyst. But the root cause is the player who struck the cue ball. The professor's obsession with her pedometer was a proximate cause. The root cause, as she later admitted, was a period of severe personal and professional crisis. She was facing the terrifying uncertainty of the academic job market and the painful disintegration of her marriage. The pedometer did not create her anxiety. It simply provided a controllable, quantifiable escape from a reality she desperately wanted to avoid. Remember this: distraction is always an unhealthy escape from reality. Unless we deal with the root causes of our discomfort, we will perpetually find new ways to distract ourselves. Blaming a smartphone for our lack of focus is just as flawed as blaming a pedometer for making someone climb 2,000 stairs in the middle of the night. If our distractions are fundamentally an attempt to escape psychological pain, then it stands to reason that time management is, at its very core, pain management. But why are we in so much pain? Why, in an era of unprecedented safety, health, and comfort, is there a perpetual restlessness echoing in the human psyche? The 18th century poet Samuel Johnson once confessed that his life was one long escape from himself. This is the shared human condition. Evolution did not wire us for sustained, happily ever after contentment. A species that is perfectly satisfied with its lot in life is a species that loses its incentive to innovate, explore, and survive. We were designed to be perpetually perturbed. There are 4 distinct psychological factors that guarantee our satisfaction is always fleeting. The first factor is boredom. The lengths to which the human mind will go to avoid being understimulated are staggering. In a notable psychological study, participants were asked to sit alone in an empty room for just 15 minutes with nothing but their own thoughts. The only object in the room was a machine that allowed them to administer a mild, painful electric shock to themselves. Prior to the isolation, every participant explicitly stated they would pay money to avoid being shocked. Yet, left alone with the agonizing silence of their own minds, a shocking majority of the subjects chose to electrocute themselves rather than endure the boredom. The second factor is the negativity bias. We are genetically predisposed to pay far more attention to bad news, negative events, and threats than we are to positive or neutral stimuli. Babies exhibit this bias as early as 7 months old. This pessimism kept our ancestors alive. Ignoring a beautiful sunset had no consequence, but ignoring the rustle of a predator in the bushes meant death. The third factor is rumination. We possess a powerful tendency to chew over bad experiences, past mistakes, and perceived slights over and over again. We constantly compare our current reality to an unachieved, idealized standard. While reflecting on errors can occasionally lead to better future strategies, it predominantly manifests as a relentless self-critical loop that makes us miserable. The fourth, and perhaps the cruelest factor, is hedonic adaptation. This is Mother Nature's ultimate bait and switch. We are convinced that if we just achieve the next promotion, buy the new car, or find the perfect partner, we will finally be happy. Yet, whatever euphoric high we experience quickly fades, returning us to our baseline level of dissatisfaction. Remember this, feeling bad is not a sign that something is broken within you. It is exactly what survival of the fittest intended. Dissatisfaction is the invisible engine that drives our species forward. It is the fuel for art, innovation, and progress. Once we disavow the toxic myth that we are supposed to be happy all the time, we can stop using distraction to numb our natural evolutionary hardware. How, then, do we manage this internal discomfort without succumbing to the immediate relief of a distraction? The instinctive response for most people is mental abstinence. We try to force ourselves to stop. We grit our teeth and tell ourselves to just say no. But the human mind is a rebellious instrument, and strict mental abstinence frequently backfires. In 1863, the novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky noted that if you try to pose for yourself the task of not thinking of a polar bear, the cursed thing will come to mind every minute. Over a century later, social psychologists tested this theory and found it to be entirely accurate. When subjects were explicitly told to suppress thoughts of a white bear, the thought rebounded into their minds with aggressive frequency. This is known as ironic process theory. Relieving the tension of a suppressed desire ultimately makes giving into that desire feel far more rewarding. An endless, exhausting cycle of resisting, ruminating, and finally surrendering drives many of our most destructive behaviors. Consider the physical craving for a cigarette. Most people believe the urge to smoke is purely a chemical demand for nicotine. While nicotine is highly addictive, the psychological framing of the craving is equally profound. In a study of flight attendants who smoked, researchers monitored their craving levels on 2 different flights, a short 3-hour flight to Europe and a long 10-hour flight to New York. If cravings were purely chemical, both groups would experience peak agony after the same amount of time had passed since their last cigarette. But the data revealed something fascinating. The attendants on the 10-hour flight reported very weak cravings at the exact moment their colleagues on the shorter flight were experiencing overwhelming urges. The level of craving was not dictated by how much time had passed, but by how much time was left before they knew they were allowed to smoke again. The brain modulated the agonizing craving based on the psychological context. Remember this. Attempting to brutally suppress an urge often triggers rumination and makes the desire grow infinitely stronger. Mental abstinence can be a trap. If something as powerfully addictive as nicotine can be modulated by how we think about it, we absolutely have the power to trick our brains into mastering the far less potent urges to check our email or scroll through a social media feed. We can manage the distractions that originate from within not by fighting them, but by changing our psychological relationship to them. Chapter 3. Reimagining your approach. To break the cycle of distraction, we must profoundly change how we interact with our own minds. We cannot permanently eradicate the negative emotions that bubble up within us. That is an involuntary biological reality of being human. We cannot control the sudden spike of anxiety, the heavy blanket of boredom, or the sharp sting of self-doubt. However, we maintain complete and absolute authority over how we respond to those feelings. When we attempt to forcefully suppress an urge, we inadvertently amplify its power. The alternative is not suppression, but reimagining. By fundamentally changing our relationship with our internal triggers, the tasks we face, and our own temperament, we can dismantle the machinery of distraction from the inside out. The process begins by reimagining the internal trigger itself. Instead of fleeing from psychological discomfort, we must learn to study it. The first step in this psychological shift is to actively look for the discomfort that precedes the distraction, focusing entirely on the internal trigger. What was the exact emotional state that prompted you to reach for your phone or open a new browser tab? Was it a fleeting sense of incompetence when a work problem became too complex? Was it loneliness? You must become an impartial observer of your own mind, catching the urge in the brief critical window between the impulse and the action. Once the underlying discomfort is identified, the second step is to write down the trigger. Documentation is a powerful tool for cognitive diffusion. Keep a simple log. Note the time of day, what you were supposed to be doing, and the precise emotion you felt right before you lost focus. Merely putting the urge into words strips it of its vague, overwhelming power. It externalizes the internal chaos, transforming a commanding emotional wave into a simple, manageable data point on a piece of paper. The third step requires you to explore your sensations. Instead of instinctively turning away from the negative feeling, turn deliberately toward it. Get intensely curious. How does the urge manifest physically in your body? Is there a tightness in your chest, a fluttering in your stomach, a tension in your jaw? One effective technique is to visualize the urge as a leaf floating down a stream. You are standing on the bank, watching the thought or the craving drift past you. You acknowledge its presence, but you do not have to dive into the water and let it carry you away. You are the observer of the sensation, not the sensation itself. The fourth step in mastering your internal landscape is to beware of liminal moments. These are the dangerous, transitional spaces in our day. The few seconds spent waiting for an elevator, the moment a web page takes too long to load, or the pause at a red traffic light. In these tiny fractures of time, we habitually reach for a distraction, intending to look at a screen for just 1 second. Yet, 20 minutes later, we are still scrolling, hopelessly derailed. To combat this, implement the 10-minute rule. When the urge to check your device strikes during a liminal moment or at any time, tell yourself that you are absolutely allowed to give in to the distraction, but you must wait exactly 10 minutes. Sit with the urge. Surf the wave of the craving. Almost inevitably, by the time the 10 minutes have passed, the emotional intensity of the trigger will have subsided, and the desire to escape will have vanished. Beyond reimagining our triggers, we must also reimagine the task itself. We frequently abandon our work because we have convinced ourselves that the task is inherently boring, tedious, or unbearable. We tell ourselves that we need to find a way to make it fun. But our cultural understanding of fun is deeply flawed. We assume fun means adding a layer of artificial entertainment, a sugar-coating of gamification or external rewards. True play, however, does not require a leaderboard or a prize. Fun is simply the result of paying deliberate, close attention. It is the exhaust of intense focus. The cure for boredom is curiosity. We can reimagine any mundane task by looking at it so closely that we begin to see the hidden variables and the subtle challenges within it. A barista making 1,000 cups of coffee a day does not find joy in the repetition. They find joy in the pursuit of the perfect microfoam or the exact precision of the pour. When we operate under constraints and actively look for the variability in our work, the task transforms. We stop trying to escape it and instead become completely absorbed by it. The work becomes a playground, not because it is objectively entertaining, but because we have brought a profound, microscopic level of attention to its execution. The final pillar of this internal transformation requires us to reimagine our temperament. We are constantly held back by a pervasive psychological myth, the idea of ego depletion. For years, popular science told us that willpower was a finite resource, like a gas tank that slowly empties throughout the day. If you resisted eating a donut in the morning, you would supposedly have less willpower to focus on a spreadsheet in the afternoon. However, recent scientific replication has heavily scrutinized this theory. It turns out that ego depletion is largely a self-fulfilling prophecy. Willpower is not a battery that runs out. It is an emotion. Just as we do not run out of joy or anger, we do not run out of willpower. The only people who experience a drastic drop in self-control are the people who fundamentally believe that their willpower is limited. If you tell yourself you are spent, your brain will act as if it is spent. This extends to how we speak to ourselves when we inevitably fail. When we give in to distraction, our immediate reflex is often harsh self-criticism. We call ourselves lazy, undisciplined, or incapable. But studies show that people who are highly self-compassionate are actually much more resilient and successful in the long run. Self-flagellation does not build discipline. It creates more psychological pain, which in turn creates a stronger internal trigger, leading to more distraction. To reimagine your temperament, you must silence the inner tyrant. When you slip up, speak to yourself with the exact same grace, understanding, and objective advice you would offer a respected friend. You are not broken. You are simply learning to navigate an incredibly complex cognitive landscape. By changing the narrative of who you are, you reclaim the power to dictate what you do. Chapter 4. Making time for traction. Once we have recognized the internal forces that propel us toward distraction and have learned to sit with the discomfort that so often derails us, we must turn our attention outward to the architecture of our days. Traction, by its very definition, is any action that draws us toward what we genuinely want in life, while distraction pulls us away. If we do not master our internal triggers, we will perpetually seek quick psychological fixes to soothe our underlying pain. But even with a fortified internal landscape, we must actively construct a framework that makes traction possible. To do this, we must examine the ledger of our lives, our time. The German philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe famously observed that if he knew how a person spent their time, he would know what might become of that person. The Roman Stoic Seneca echoed a similar sentiment centuries earlier, lamenting that while people are notoriously stingy in guarding their physical property, they are incredibly wasteful with the one resource that is truly irreplaceable. Today, we install complex security systems to protect our homes and vehicles, yet we leave our most precious asset entirely unguarded. The vast majority of people wake up each morning without a concrete plan, relying instead on endless, unstructured to-do lists. If we refuse to plan our days, we invite the world to plan them for us. A to-do list only tells us what we hope to accomplish. It does not protect the time required to do it. Instead of merely listing what we intend to do, we must begin by clarifying why we are doing it. We must begin with our values. Turn your values into time. Values are not endpoints to be achieved. You cannot complete a value any more than you can finish the act of being an honest person or a creative soul. Rather, values are the attributes of the individual we aspire to be. They are the guiding stars we use to navigate the complex choices of our existence. Yet, in the chaotic rush of modern life, we chronically neglect these guiding stars. We pour all our energy into professional advancement at the expense of our familial bonds, or we dedicate ourselves so entirely to our children that we lose our own physical health and personal identity in the process. When we neglect our core values, our lives fall out of balance. We begin to feel a deep existential dissatisfaction, which, ironically, triggers the very psychological discomfort that drives us right back into the arms of mindless distraction. Life domains. To prevent this imbalance, we can categorize our values into 3 distinct life domains. The ancient Stoic philosopher Heracles utilized concentric circles to illustrate the interconnected duties of a human life, starting with the mind and body at the very center, moving outward to family, community, and humanity. Similarly, we can visualize where our time goes by dividing our lives into 3 primary domains: you, relationships, and work. In order to embody our values across these 3 domains, we must transition from abstract intentions to concrete schedules. We cannot merely hope to find the time. We must ruthlessly reserve it. This requires the practice of time boxing, eliminating the white space on your calendar so that every hour is accounted for. The objective is not to become a rigid machine, but to create a template for how you intend to spend your day. It does not matter if you schedule 2 hours to stare at the ceiling, scroll through social media, or play a video game. If that is what you plan to do, it is traction. Conversely, if you sit down to write a critical business proposal and instead spend 45 minutes organizing your email inbox, that seemingly productive act is actually a distraction because it is not what you intended to do with that specific block of time. You cannot define what a distraction is unless you know exactly what it is distracting you from. By designing a perfect weekly template, you create a baseline. Each week you can reflect on the previous days like a curious scientist, noting where you fell off track and refining the calendar for the week ahead. Control the inputs, not the outcomes. When plotting the 3 domains, the center of the circle is always you. Like any valuable asset, your mind and body require rigorous maintenance, just as you would never casually blow off a vital meeting with a major client or your boss. You must never break the appointments you make with yourself. Sleep, exercise, proper nourishment, and time for personal reflection are the bedrock upon which the other 2 domains rest. If you are exhausted, malnourished, or spiritually depleted, your relationships will suffer and your professional output will decline. However, scheduling time for oneself often leads to a unique frustration when things do not go as planned. For instance, you might faithfully schedule 8 hours of sleep, only to find yourself wide awake at 3 in the morning. When this happens, the natural reaction is panic. You begin to ruminate on the sleep you are losing, which creates anxiety, which in turn guarantees that you will remain awake. The crucial shift in perspective is realizing that we cannot completely control the outcome of our efforts. We can only control the input. You cannot forcefully command your brain to sleep, nor can you guarantee that sitting at your desk for an hour will result in a brilliant creative breakthrough. What you can control is the time you dedicate to the endeavor. You provide your body with the time and the dark room required for rest. You provide your mind with the quiet hour at the desk required for writing. If the sleep does not come, or the brilliant idea remains elusive, you have still succeeded by simply putting in the time. The positive result of your time is a hope. The time you put in is a certainty. If you show up, you give traction a chance. If you do not schedule the time, failure is guaranteed. Time management requires that we stop agonizing over outcomes we cannot dictate and focus entirely on the inputs we control. Schedule important relationships. Moving outward from the self, the next domain encompasses our most important relationships. Friends and family are the individuals who help us actualize our values of loyalty, love, and responsibility. Yet they are frequently treated as residual beneficiaries, the people who receive whatever scraps of time happen to be left over after the demands of work and errands have consumed our day. If we wish to be fully present partners and parents, we must literally schedule the time to do so. This might mean dedicating a specific afternoon each week to an undivided activity with a child, removing the burden of having to decide what to do in the moment. It also extends to the practical maintenance of a household. Without a clear, time-boxed agreement on who is handling domestic chores, resentment festers. Couples often fight not because they do not want to help each other, but because the division of labor is invisible and unstructured. Taking the time to list household duties and firmly placing them on the calendar ensures an equitable split and protects the value of equality within a partnership. Furthermore, we must recognize that scheduling time for friendships is a biological necessity. Research consistently shows that social disconnection is as dangerous to our physical health as obesity. As we age, the effortless proximity of childhood friendships disappears. Careers and family obligations easily crowd out the time required to maintain deep social bonds. Friendships starve to death if they are not fed with time. To counter this, we must build regular, unalterable gatherings into our calendars, whether it is a bi-weekly lunch with a specific group of friends or a regular weekend walk. Cementing these interactions in the schedule ensures they happen, rain or shine, preventing our most vital relationships from withering away. Sync with stakeholders at work. The final domain, and the one that demands the vast majority of our waking hours, is work. Even if we have meticulously scheduled our personal time, the modern workplace often behaves like a chaotic entity determined to shatter our plans. We are plagued by endless emails, unexpected meetings, and the pervasive pressure to be constantly available, blurring the boundaries between professional obligations and personal life. To make time for traction in this domain, we must actively align our schedules with the stakeholders in our professional lives. Much of the tension in the workplace arises from a profound lack of transparency. Managers frequently have no idea how their employees are actually spending their days, and employees are terrified of missing invisible expectations. When projects take longer than anticipated, managers often reflexively assume the employee needs to work harder and longer, leading to a toxic cycle of overwork and diminishing returns. The antidote to this dysfunction is the simple act of schedule syncing. Once you have created a time-boxed calendar that reflects your priorities, including dedicated blocks for focused, uninterrupted work and specific windows for answering emails and messages, you must share this visual blueprint with your manager. Sitting down for a brief, regular meeting to review the upcoming week's schedule completely alters the dynamic. It shifts the conversation from abstract demands to concrete realities. It allows the employer to see exactly where the time is going and provides an opportunity to reprioritize tasks collaboratively. If the manager needs an urgent project completed, they can look at the schedule and dictate which other task must be delayed to make room for it. It also establishes clear boundaries regarding after-hours communication, protecting the time allocated for the other crucial domains of your life. By defining how our hours will be spent and rigorously syncing those expectations with the people who depend on us, we transform our time from an unguarded resource into a deliberate reflection of our deepest values. Chapter 5. Hacking Back the Modern Office. Even when we have successfully fortified our internal psychological landscape and meticulously aligned our time with our values, we must inevitably face the reality of the modern world. We step out of our carefully structured personal sanctuaries and directly into environments that are explicitly designed to interrupt us. Nowhere is this more apparent and more damaging than in the modern workplace. The contemporary office, whether physical or digital, operates as a relentless engine of external triggers. We are bombarded by notifications, tapped on the shoulder by well-meaning colleagues, summoned to endless meetings, and buried under an avalanche of emails and instant messages. When confronted with this onslaught, it is easy to adopt a posture of helpless resignation. We assume that constant accessibility is simply the unavoidable price of professional life. Yet, we must remember that an external trigger is not inherently malicious. A notification reminding you to leave for an important appointment is immensely helpful. A fire alarm is an external trigger that saves lives. The critical question we must ask of every single interruption in our environment is this: is this trigger serving me, or am I serving it? If a prompt aligns with the schedule we have purposefully designed, it is serving us. If it rips us away from our intended task and forces us to react to someone else's priority, we have become the servant. To reclaim our autonomy, we must systematically hack back the external triggers that dominate our professional lives, beginning with the physical environment of the office itself. The transition to open-plan offices was championed as a triumph of collaboration and transparency. In reality, it stripped workers of their most vital professional asset, the ability to focus. When anyone can walk up to your desk and interrupt you at any moment, deep work becomes almost impossible. Every tap on the shoulder fractures your concentration, and the cognitive cost of re-engaging with complex work after an interruption is exorbitant. To solve this, we can look to a surprisingly high-stakes environment where interruptions are a matter of life and death. In many hospitals, a staggering number of medication errors occur because nurses are repeatedly interrupted by colleagues while trying to calculate and dispense dosages. To combat this, a group of researchers implemented a radically simple solution. They required nurses to wear brightly colored sashes or vests while dispensing medication. The physical garment served as an unambiguous, non-verbal signal to everyone else in the hospital that the nurse was engaged in focused work and was not to be disturbed. The result was a dramatic and immediate drop in medication errors. We must implement a similar defense mechanism in our own workspaces. We need a clear physical signal that communicates when we are indistractable. A simple piece of cardstock placed on your computer monitor, stating that you are currently doing focused work and should not be interrupted unless it is a genuine emergency, acts as the office equivalent of the nurse's red vest. It erects a temporary, respected boundary in a boundaryless environment. When your colleagues understand what the signal means, they will inherently respect your time, just as you must respect theirs when the sign is displayed. However, defending the physical space is only the first skirmish. The most invasive and persistent external trigger in the modern workforce is email. Email is the ultimate variable reward system. Every time we pull down to refresh our inbox, we are pulling the lever of a slot machine, hoping for good news, fearing bad news, and always receiving a highly unpredictable mix of both. The anxiety of the unknown keeps us compulsively checking. To hack back email, we must understand a fundamental law of communication. The amount of time we spend on email is largely dictated by the number of emails we receive, and the number of emails we receive is directly correlated to the number of emails we send. It is a relentless, ping-ponging cycle of rapid responses. To reduce the noise, we must slow down the game. The first tactic is to open up office hours. Many emails are sent simply because colleagues want to unload a question from their own cognitive burden, not because they need an immediate answer. If you set aside a specific block of time each week, for example Thursday afternoons, where anyone can come to your desk or call you to discuss non-urgent matters, you can eliminate a massive volume of back-and-forth emails. When an issue arises, they can simply hold it for office hours. The second tactic is to systematically delay delivery. When you respond to an email immediately, you implicitly train the sender to expect a rapid reply, guaranteeing they will write back just as quickly. By utilizing the delayed delivery function built into almost every email client, you can write your response in the present moment but schedule it to be sent hours or even days later. This simple friction breaks the manic loop of instant communication, drastically reducing the total volume of messages you have to process. Yet, as email has become overwhelming, many organizations have fled to an even more chaotic alternative: the group chat. Platforms designed for continuous instant communication have essentially digitized the open plan office, bringing all of its worst attributes into our pockets and onto our screens. Group chat operates like a conveyor belt of anxiety. If you look away, you fear you are missing a critical decision or being left out of the cultural loop. To hack back group chat, we must establish strict operational rules. The most important rule is to use it like a sauna. You should enter the chat, experience the intense heat of rapid communication to resolve a specific issue, and then immediately get out. You cannot live in the sauna, and you cannot live in a group chat without severely damaging your cognitive health. You must schedule specific times to engage with the platform, be incredibly picky about which channels or groups you actually need to join, and use the medium selectively. If a conversation requires nuance, deep thought, or conflict resolution, the rapid-fire, emotionally flat environment of a group chat is the worst possible place to hold it. Finally, we must confront the most expensive and time-consuming external trigger of all: the poorly executed meeting. Meetings should be the crucible where well-prepared minds come together to forge consensus. Instead, they are typically used as a lazy substitute for individual preparation. People call meetings simply to think out loud, wasting the collective time of everyone in the room. To hack back meetings, one unbreakable rule must be enforced: no agenda, no meeting. If the person calling the meeting has not taken the time to write down exactly what problem is being solved and provided the relevant background information in advance, the meeting should not happen. Furthermore, the meeting room must become a sanctuary of presence. If the goal is to reach consensus and solve complex problems, every participant must be fully engaged. This means eliminating the external triggers within the room itself. Laptops and smartphones must be left at the door. If a screen is absolutely necessary for a presentation, only one device should be used. When participants are deprived of their digital pacifiers, meetings become shorter, decisions are made faster, and the time saved can be reinvested into the deep, focused traction that actually moves the organization forward. Chapter 6: Hacking Back Technology and Media. While the modern office presents a formidable battleground for our attention, the most intimate and pervasive external triggers reside much closer to home. They are nestled in our pockets, illuminating our desks and glowing softly on our nightstands. Our personal devices, particularly the smartphone, have become extensions of our central nervous system. We reach for them with the unconscious reflex of breathing. Because these devices are so deeply integrated into the fabric of our daily existence, we cannot simply discard them. The goal of becoming indistractable is not to become a technological hermit. Rather, it is to surgically sever the manipulative ties these devices use to hijack our focus, transforming them from demanding masters into silent, obedient servants. To reclaim our technological sovereignty, we must begin with the device we interact with most frequently. Hacking back the smartphone requires a systematic four-step process. The first step is to ruthlessly remove. We carry around digital hoarding habits, accumulating dozens of applications that no longer serve us, yet continue to siphon our attention. You must examine every app on your phone and ask a critical question. Does this application pull me toward traction or drag me into distraction? If an app is designed solely to consume your time without enriching your life, delete it. The brief panic of removal quickly fades into a profound sense of relief. The second step is to replace. For the applications you genuinely enjoy or find occasionally useful, perhaps social media, newsreaders, or video platforms, you must change when and how you access them. You do not need to banish them from your life, but you must banish them from your pocket. Delete these apps from your phone and replace the habit by accessing them only through a desktop computer during a specifically scheduled time box. By adding this layer of physical friction, you ensure that you only engage with these platforms intentionally, rather than falling into an unconscious scroll while waiting in line at the grocery store. Furthermore, consider replacing the functions of the phone with single-purpose devices. If you use your phone to check the time, you will inevitably see a notification and get sucked in. Wearing a classic wristwatch is a remarkably effective way to bypass that trigger entirely. The third step is to rearrange. The physical layout of your smartphone screen dictates your behavior. If your home screen is cluttered with colorful, emotionally volatile applications, your attention is scattered the moment you unlock the device. You must design an environment that promotes focus. Move all distracting applications off the first screen and bury them in folders on secondary pages. Your primary screen should contain only the essential tools that require your immediate functional use, such as a map, a calendar, or a ride-sharing app. When you unlock the phone, it should look boring. It should look like a tool, not a toy. The fourth and final step in hacking back the smartphone is to reclaim your cognitive peace by altering the notification settings. The default state of a modern smartphone is loud and visually aggressive. It is designed to interrupt you. You must dive into the settings and turn off almost every visual badge and audio ping. Unless an application requires your immediate emergency attention, it has no right to buzz in your pocket or display a red notification dot. You must decide when to check your messages. Your phone should not have the authority to summon you. Once the phone is pacified, we must turn our attention to the physical and digital landscape of our desks. A cluttered environment is not merely an aesthetic issue, it is a profound cognitive burden. Every stray piece of paper, every open folder, and every scattered icon on a computer desktop acts as a microscopic external trigger. Our brains are constantly, subconsciously processing the visual field. When that field is messy, our cognitive bandwidth is continuously drained as the mind evaluates and ignores the clutter. By clearing the physical desk and hiding all files into designated folders on the computer, we eliminate hundreds of tiny, invisible interruptions. A clear workspace is the foundation of a clear mind. Yet even with a pristine desktop, we face the overwhelming tide of online content. We are constantly stumbling upon fascinating articles, essays, and videos throughout the day. Our instinctive reaction is to leave the browser tab open, intending to read it later. Soon, the browser is choked with open tabs, each one a glaring reminder of a task left undone, creating a low-level hum of anxiety. To hack back this endless flow, we must change how we consume information. Instead of reading articles immediately and derailing our current task, or leaving them open to haunt us, we must utilize technology to save them. Applications designed to capture articles allow you to quickly save a text and close the tab, preserving your focus. But the true leverage comes from how you consume that saved content. We often believe multitasking is a myth, and when it involves complex cognitive work, it is. You cannot write a proposal and listen to a podcast simultaneously. However, we can successfully engage in multi-channeling, pairing a cognitive task with a physical one. By using text-to-speech technology to listen to those saved articles while exercising, commuting, or doing household chores, you transform a potential distraction into a rewarding, educational experience that fits perfectly into your schedule. Finally, we must confront the ultimate digital trap, the feed. Whether it is a social media timeline, a news aggregator, or a video recommendation engine, the feed is explicitly engineered to never end. It is a bottomless bowl designed to exploit our psychological vulnerabilities, keeping us scrolling past the point of diminishing returns. The algorithm dictates what we see, deliberately surfacing content that triggers outrage, anxiety, or envy because those emotions drive the highest engagement. To hack back the feed, you do not have to abandon the platforms entirely. The value of these networks often lies in connecting with specific people or groups. The poison is the feed itself. Fortunately, we can use technology to protect us from technology. By installing simple browser extensions that eradicate the newsfeed, you can effectively blind the algorithm. When you log onto a social network with the feed blocked, you see a blank page. The site no longer tells you what to look at. If you want to see updates from a specific friend, you must intentionally search for their profile. You regain complete control of the navigation. By eliminating the infinite scroll, you extract the utility of the platform without surrendering a single second to its manipulative design. Chapter 7. Preventing Distraction with Pacts. The human mind is remarkably adept at rationalizing bad behavior in the heat of the moment. We set noble intentions in the quiet clarity of the morning only to abandon them by the afternoon when the psychological urge to distract ourselves arises. To counteract this predictable failure of willpower, we must employ the final and most definitive strategy in the Indistractable framework, the pre-commitment. The concept is ancient, perhaps best illustrated in Homer's epic, The Odyssey. The hero Ulysses must navigate his ship past the island of the Sirens, mythical creatures whose enchanting songs compel sailors to steer their ships into jagged rocks to their deaths. Ulysses desperately wants to hear the legendary song, but he knows that in the moment he will be utterly powerless against its lure. His solution is a brilliant pre-commitment. He orders his crew to fill their ears with beeswax so they cannot hear the music, and he commands them to tie him tightly to the ship's wooden mast. He explicitly instructs them not to untie him, no matter how desperately he begs or threatens them. As they sail past the island, the sirens sing. Ulysses, driven mad by the desire to approach them, thrashes against his bindings and screams to be released. But the ropes hold. The crew, deaf to the song, rows steadily on. Ulysses survives not through willpower in the moment of temptation, but through a calculated decision made well before the temptation ever occurred. A pre-commitment removes the choice from the future self. It is a binding pact we make with ourselves to lock in our intended behavior, recognizing that our future self cannot be trusted when faced with an internal trigger. To build this ultimate defense, there are 3 distinct types of pacts we can forge: effort pacts, price pacts, and identity pacts. An effort pact prevents distraction by introducing a deliberate layer of friction between our current state and the distracting behavior. Human beings are biologically wired to follow the path of least resistance. When a smartphone is resting on the desk right next to our keyboard, the effort required to check it is near zero. By increasing the physical or digital effort required to access the distraction, we give our logical brain the few critical seconds it needs to override the impulsive urge. This can be as simple as leaving your device in another room while working, or physically unplugging your internet router when you need to focus on offline writing. We can also use technology to create this friction for us. Applications that block access to distracting websites for a set period, or programs that lock you out of your computer entirely when you should be sleeping, are modern variations of Ulysses's ropes. When the effort required to abandon our work becomes greater than the effort required to continue it, we stay the course. The second method of locking in our intentions is the price pact. This involves putting hard-earned money on the line to guarantee our behavior. Humans are deeply motivated by loss aversion. The psychological pain of losing something we already have is significantly stronger than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. A price pact weaponizes this biological quirk in our favor. Imagine handing a trusted friend a crisp $100 bill and telling them to burn it or donate it to a charity you despise if you fail to complete your scheduled work by the end of the week. Suddenly, the abstract, distant cost of procrastination is replaced by an immediate, painful, and highly tangible financial penalty. The threat of losing the money cleanly overrides the urge to seek a cheap, distracting thrill. However, price pacts must be used with caution. They are highly effective for short-term, clearly defined tasks, but they fail miserably if applied to behaviors we cannot fully control. You should never make a price pact related to a specific outcome like securing a promotion or losing 10 pounds, but you can absolutely make a price pact regarding the inputs you control, such as making 50 sales calls a day or going to the gym. The most profound and lasting pre-commitment, however, is the identity pact. Our self-image fundamentally dictates our behavior. If we secretly believe we are lazy, we will act lazily. If we believe we lack discipline, we will inevitably yield to distraction. To cement our focus, we must shift how we define ourselves at a foundational level. The power of an identity pact lies in the psychology of language. Research consistently demonstrates that individuals who describe their behavior using nouns rather than verbs are significantly more likely to maintain their commitments. When someone is asked, "How important is it to you to vote?" they are far less likely to show up at the polls than someone who is asked, "How important is it to you to be a voter?" Voting is an action you do, which can easily be skipped. A voter is who you are. We see this powerfully in dietary choices. A person who says, "I cannot eat meat," is expressing a restriction forced upon them. a deprivation that requires constant willpower to uphold. Eventually, willpower fails. But a person who says, "I am a vegetarian," is stating a concrete fact about their identity. The restriction is no longer a burden, it is simply an organic reflection of who they are. They do not agonize over whether to eat a steak. Vegetarians simply do not eat meat. To truly master our attention, we must adopt this profound psychological shift. We must stop telling ourselves and others, "I am trying to focus," or "I cannot look at my phone right now." Instead, we must internalize and vocalize a new reality. I am an indistractable person. By aligning our daily actions with this new identity, the need to rely on exhaustive willpower diminishes. When a distraction presents itself, an indistractable person does not endure a grueling internal debate over whether to give in. The decision has already been made by the very nature of who they have chosen to be. Chapter 8. Building the Indistractable Workplace. We instinctively blame our screens for the erosion of our professional focus. When an office is plagued by missed deadlines, chronic burnout, and employees frantically typing emails under the conference room table during a meeting, leadership often points the finger at the technology. We assume that smartphones and instant messaging platforms have fundamentally broken the modern worker. But this diagnosis mistakes the symptom for the disease. If an individual's distraction is driven by a desire to escape internal psychological discomfort, then collective distraction in a professional environment is driven by a collective discomfort. In the corporate world, an epidemic of distraction is the most glaring sign of profound organizational dysfunction. Just as a persistent fever signals an underlying infection, a workplace where employees feel compelled to be constantly connected and continuously responsive is suffering from a toxic culture. When workers are answering emails at 10 o'clock at night or checking their group chats on a Sunday morning, they are rarely doing so out of a deep, passionate love for corporate communication. They are doing so out of fear. They operate in an environment where expectations are murky, where responsiveness is equated with dedication, and where stepping away from the keyboard feels like a career risk. The technology is merely the conduit for this anxiety. The root cause is the environment itself. To cure this dysfunction, we must understand the core component of any healthy, high-performing organization: psychological safety. This concept, extensively studied in the realm of organizational behavior, is the shared belief among team members that they will not be humiliated, punished, or fired for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. In a workplace lacking psychological safety, anxiety is the dominant emotion. Employees are terrified of looking incompetent or disconnected. Consequently, they engage in highly visible, low-value activities to prove their worth. They participate in the frantic ping-pong match of instant messaging and reply all to every email, projecting an aura of constant busyness. This pseudo-work provides a temporary shield against anxiety, but it destroys the ability to engage in the deep, focused work that actually drives a company forward. Fixing a culture of distraction, therefore, is not a matter of banning cell phones or restricting internet access. It is the ultimate test of a company's culture. A truly indistractable workplace is built on a foundation where employees are given the psychological safety to express their concerns about unmanageable expectations and the constant barrage of interruptions. Consider the intensely demanding world of elite management consulting. For decades, the industry standard was a punishing, always-on culture. Consultants were expected to be at the absolute mercy of their clients, sacrificing their evenings, weekends, and personal lives to prove their dedication. The Boston Consulting Group, one of the most prestigious firms in the world, recognized that this relentless pace was leading to massive burnout and the loss of brilliant talent. They partnered with a researcher to implement a radical experiment called predictable time off. The premise was deceptively simple. Every individual on a consulting team was required to take one evening completely off every week. During this designated time, they were strictly forbidden from checking email, answering calls, or doing any work whatsoever. Initially, the partners at the firm were terrified. They believed that intentionally making their consultants unavailable would infuriate their high-paying clients and destroy their competitive edge. However, enforcing this single night of predictability forced the teams to do something they had never done before. They had to talk to each other about how they worked. To ensure that one person could truly disconnect, the rest of the team had to coordinate, share information, and anticipate client needs in advance. They had to hold regular meetings to discuss their processes and air their grievances about inefficiencies. The predictable time off was not just a break, it was a mechanism that forced communication and built psychological safety. The results shattered the industry's preconceived notions. The teams that participated in the experiment not only reported significantly higher job satisfaction and lower burnout, but the quality of their work actually improved. The clients were not angry, they were better served by teams that were well rested, highly coordinated, and capable of deep, focused thought rather than reactive, exhausted scrambling. Even the companies that manufacture the very tools of modern workplace distraction understand this dynamic. Slack, the ubiquitous group chat platform that is often blamed for turning offices into chaotic digital chatterboxes, operates its own headquarters with an entirely different philosophy. Walking through their corporate offices, one does not find a frantic, chaotic environment of people glued to their screens at all hours. Their company motto explicitly encourages employees to work hard and go home. They understand that their software is a tool for communication, not a replacement for a life. If an employee is sending messages on a weekend, management views it as a failure of leadership, a sign that the employee is overburdened or that boundaries are not being respected. An indistractable workplace, therefore, is not an environment devoid of technology. It is an environment where technology is used to facilitate human intent rather than override it. It is a culture that fundamentally respects the finite nature of human attention. Leaders in these organizations do not equate physical presence or digital responsiveness with actual value. They measure output, not hours connected. They model the behavior they wish to see, ruthlessly protecting their own time and explicitly encouraging their teams to do the same. When leaders demonstrate that it is safe to disconnect, the persistent hum of anxiety fades. Employees stop using distraction as a shield and finally step into the clear, focused space where their best work is actually done. Chapter 9. Raising Indistractable Children. Every generation of parents faces a unique cultural panic, but those raising children in the digital age are navigating a deeply terrifying, unprecedented landscape. We watch our children stare vacantly into glowing screens, their fingers tapping furiously as the hours slip away. In our fear, we instinctively reach for the most severe terminology available. We declare that our children are addicted to technology. We blame the devices, the social media executives, and the video game developers for stealing our children's minds. But using the language of clinical addiction for what is, in the vast majority of cases, simply a bad habit, is a dangerous misdiagnosis. It is a convenient excuse. Declaring a child addicted implies that they are entirely powerless, and worse, it absolves the surrounding environment, including the parents and the educational system, of any responsibility for the child's behavior. If we truly want to raise children who can navigate the digital world safely, we must stop acting as wardens trying to lock away the contraband, and instead become deeply curious about the underlying reasons our children are seeking to escape reality in the first place. Just as adults are driven to distraction by internal triggers like boredom, stress, or a sense of inadequacy, children flee to the digital realm to escape their own profound psychological discomfort. To understand what is driving them away from the physical world, we must understand what they are fundamentally lacking within it. Human beings require 3 essential psychological nutrients to thrive, just as our bodies require macronutrients to survive. The first is autonomy, the feeling of having volition and control over one's own choices. The second is competence, the belief that we are growing, mastering skills, and successfully navigating our environment. The third is relatedness, the deep, meaningful connection we feel with others. When a child's environment fails to provide these nutrients, they will naturally seek out a substitute. Consider the landscape of modern childhood. It is arguably the most highly regimented, supervised, and restricted era in human history. From the moment a child wakes up, adults tell them what to wear, what to eat, where to sit, what to study, and when they are allowed to speak. Their autonomy is systematically stripped away, particularly within the traditional schooling system. Furthermore, standardized testing and rigid academic structures frequently leave children feeling profoundly incompetent if they do not learn in the exact manner the system demands. Finally, the unstructured, free-roaming play that once allowed children to forge deep bonds of relatedness with their peers has been largely replaced by hyper-organized, adult-led extracurricular activities. We are starving our children of the essential psychological nutrients they need to grow, and then we are shocked when they turn to a digital world that offers an unlimited buffet of everything they are missing. In the digital realm, a child has absolute autonomy. They decide what to build, where to go, and what to explore. Video games are brilliantly designed to provide a constant drip of competence, offering immediate feedback, manageable challenges, and clear markers of progression. And through multiplayer games and social networks, children find the unstructured relatedness they crave, congregating in digital spaces because they are no longer allowed to roam freely in physical ones. If we want to reduce a child's reliance on screens, we must fundamentally alter their physical environment to provide these nutrients in the real world. We must give them a voice in their own lives. This begins with how we manage their time. The standard parental approach is to impose strict screen time limits, dictating exactly when a child must turn off the device. While boundaries are absolutely necessary, imposing them by force completely robs the child of autonomy and guarantees a daily battle. The alternative is to invite the child into the process of making time for traction. Sit down together with a blank calendar and discuss what the child values. Ask them how much time they believe they need for sleep, homework, family dinners, and, yes, playing their favorite games. When a child is given the agency to map out their own time, the dynamic completely shifts. If they allocate 4 hours to video games but realize they have left no time for basketball or seeing their friends, they are forced to confront the finite nature of time themselves. You transition from being the malicious enforcer of rules to a collaborative guide helping them achieve their own stated goals. Once the schedule is established, parents must help children defend that time against the aggressive design of external triggers. Just as adults struggle with notifications, children are entirely unprepared for the psychological manipulation of a buzzing phone. We must actively teach them digital literacy. We must explain to them, clearly and honestly, that the applications on their devices are explicitly designed by very smart people to keep them staring at the screen so the companies can make money. We must show them how to dive into their settings and turn off non-essential notifications. Furthermore, we must establish physical boundaries in the home, such as a strict no phones at the dinner table rule, not just for the children, but for the adults as well. A parent cannot expect a child to respect a focused family dinner if the parent is simultaneously answering work emails under the table. Finally, the ultimate goal of raising an indistractable child is to render the parent obsolete. We must teach them to make their own pre-commitments, utilizing effort pacts, price pacts, and identity pacts to police their own behavior. Instead of setting a timer and ripping the tablet out of a child's hands when it rings, a parent should ask the child, "How long do you think is fair to play?" Once the child states a time, the parent can ask, "How will you make sure you stop when the time is up?" You invite them to create their own effort pact. They might choose to set their own alarm or use an app that locks the game after an hour. The specific method matters far less than the fact that the child is the one initiating the friction. When a child learns to recognize their internal triggers, actively plans their time, mitigates external interruptions, and enforces their own pacts, they undergo a profound psychological shift. They stop viewing themselves as prisoners of parental restriction and start viewing themselves as responsible masters of their own attention. They adopt the identity of an indistractable person, carrying a lifelong shield against the endless stream of digital manipulation that awaits them in adulthood. Chapter 10. Indistractable relationships. The human desire for connection is the most profound force shaping our lives. We spend our childhoods learning how to navigate the social world, our early adulthoods seeking out our chosen tribes, and the remainder of our days tending to the intimate bonds that give our existence meaning. Yet, it is within these very relationships, our friendships and our romantic partnerships, that the modern epidemic of distraction inflicts its most subtle and devastating damage. We have allowed the external triggers of the digital age to infiltrate the spaces once reserved exclusively for human intimacy. Reclaiming these relationships requires us to extend the indistractable framework beyond our own minds and out into our social circles, demanding presence not just from ourselves but from those we hold dear. Consider a familiar scenario. You are seated at a table with a group of close friends. The conversation is flowing, the laughter is genuine. Then a brief lull occurs. In that microscopic window of silence, one person instinctively reaches into their pocket, pulls out a smartphone, and breaks eye contact with the table. Almost instantly, a ripple effect travels through the group. A second person pulls out their phone, then a third. Within moments, the shared physical space is fractured, the collective attention shattered as each individual retreats into their own private digital silo. Psychologists refer to this behavior as phubbing, a portmanteau of phone and snubbing. It is the act of ignoring a companion in order to pay attention to a device. While it may seem like a minor social faux pas, the psychological impact of phubbing is profound. It sends a clear, unspoken signal to the other person. The screen in my hand is currently more important and more interesting than you are. Furthermore, distraction is highly contagious. When one person disengages, it creates an awkward social vacuum. The remaining individuals, feeling slighted or momentarily bored, soothe their own psychological discomfort by reaching for their own devices. The distraction spreads through the group like a virus. To combat this social contagion, we must actively cultivate social antibodies. In the biological world, an antibody is a protective protein produced by the immune system to neutralize pathogens. In the social world, an antibody is an accepted norm or behavior that neutralizes toxic conduct. For decades, it was perfectly acceptable to smoke cigarettes indoors, even in crowded restaurants. But society eventually developed a social antibody against this behavior. It became universally recognized as rude and harmful to others, and the practice was systematically pushed outside. We must achieve the same cultural shift regarding digital distraction. Cultivating a social antibody among friends does not require aggression or self-righteousness. It requires gentle, direct friction. When a friend pulls out a phone in the middle of a meal, you can deploy a polite but powerful phrase. "I see you're on your phone. Is everything okay?" This simple question acts as a mirror. If there is a genuine emergency, it allows them the grace to address it. But in the vast majority of cases, it was merely an unconscious reflex. The question gently pulls them back to reality, reminding them that their physical absence has been noticed. Another highly effective social pre-commitment is the phone stack. When a group sits down for a meal, everyone places their silenced devices in a stack in the center of the table. The first person to reach for their phone before the bill arrives has to pay for everyone's dinner. It is a light-hearted price pact that explicitly protects the shared value of presence. Yet, as vital as our friendships are, there is one relationship that requires the most rigorous defense: the intimate bond we share with our romantic partners. And there is one physical space that must be preserved as an absolute sanctuary from the outside world: the bedroom. The bedroom is intended for two primary biological functions: sleep and physical intimacy. In the modern era, however, it has been transformed into a digital command center. We bring the anxieties of the workplace, the outrage of the newsfeed, and the endless comparisons of social media directly into the most vulnerable space in our homes. The cost of this intrusion is staggering. Studies show that couples who keep televisions or smartphones in the bedroom report significantly lower rates of physical intimacy and substantially higher rates of relationship dissatisfaction. When you lie in bed next to your partner and scroll through a screen, you are erecting an invisible but impenetrable wall between you. You are choosing the cheap, variable rewards of the algorithm over the deep, complex, and sometimes challenging connection with the human being breathing beside you. The solution to this crisis is stark, simple, and entirely non-negotiable. The smartphone must be banished from the bedroom. The most common defense for bringing the device to bed is that it functions as an alarm clock. This is a remarkably transparent excuse for feeding a habit. The remedy is to purchase a traditional, single-purpose alarm clock. By moving the smartphone charger to the kitchen or the living room, you create a powerful effort pact. You establish a physical boundary that external triggers cannot cross. When the bedroom is stripped of digital interference, the space reverts to its intended purpose. The quiet hours before sleep become a protected time for reflection, conversation, and intimacy. Becoming indistractable is ultimately not about achieving robotic productivity or executing a flawless daily schedule. It is a philosophy of intentional living. It is the recognition that our attention is the most valuable, irreplaceable currency we possess. When we allow our attention to be hijacked by internal fears, unmanaged schedules, pervasive external triggers, and manipulative technologies, we are essentially giving our lives away to the highest bidder. By mastering the internal triggers that cause us pain, making deliberate time for the values that bring us joy, hacking back the interruptions that fracture our focus, and creating pacts to protect our future selves, we reclaim our agency. We ensure that when we sit across from a friend, lie next to a lover, or dedicate ourselves to our life's work, we are completely, undeniably present. We stop reacting to the world, and we finally begin to choose our own lives.